The Gila River is under threat, as I've said, from a major water development project that could irreversibly harm the ecology of the river and all of these values and benefits that I've been talking about. So how did we get here? It's been more than 100 years since the first proposal to dam the Gila River. This is the Hooker Dam Association. These guys were intent upon damming up the Gila for flood control as well as agricultural and municipal use. And essentially, you know, this was a time where dam building, that's what was going on in the West, right? And this really was an outgrowth of Manifest Destiny. Go West, young man, remember that? And really taming the West, making the West more livable, right? So federal agencies like the Bureau of Reclamation were created to construct large dams, diversions, reservoirs that would provide the water to meet the needs of a booming agricultural economy and the population. And so the idea for damming the Gila River started with the Hooker Dam proposal. And the Hooker Dam Association essentially has been around since the beginning. Actually, it just went defunct about 5 years ago. But in the 1970s and 1980s, it wasn't really until the 1970s that the Hooker Dam really got any traction. I mean, it was really just kind of an idea for decades. But then in the 1970s, it got some traction. But it failed because it would have flooded the wilderness, the Gila wilderness. Didn't go anywhere. The next idea that came along right after that was the Connor Dam. It too failed. It would have flooded prime agricultural land and also would have impacted our native fish. The third attempt was the Mongoose diversion. It was a diversion structure with off-stream storage. That failed as well. And that failed because of cost reasons. Because after they went through the entire NEPA process, this was the Bureau of Reclamation, they showed up in the office of the Silver City mayor and said, "Here, mayor, here's the repayment schedule for the Mongoose water project." And the mayor said, "Sorry, we can't afford this. We don't need the water. We don't want it." So Bureau of Reclamation, after spending $6 million on a NEPA study, that ended that project. I mean, this was all great from our perspective. So flash forward to 2016 and the current threat to the Gila River under the Arizona Water Settlements Act. This was a piece of legislation passed in 2004. It settled Indian water rights claims in Arizona. And it also created the formal mechanism by which the Secretary of the Interior could deliver 14,000 acre-feet of water from the Gila River to New Mexico, as long as New Mexico agreed to deliver an equal amount of Colorado River water to downstream water users, which principally is the Gila River Indian community. So one thing to note, I mean, with this whole piece of legislation, essentially the Gila River Indian community, they were there first. They were there irrigating outside of Phoenix. So as many of you know from Western water law, first in time, first in use. So the Gila River Indian community has these water rights that New Mexico can use essentially belong to the Gila River Indian community. So the other part of the Arizona Water Settlements Act that's really important to understand is that this time, and very different from the previous 3 attempts to dam and divert the Gila, this time the Arizona Water Settlements Act provided New Mexico with money. And we all know that federal subsidies really distort people's decision making. And so the Arizona Water Settlements Act provides $66 million to New Mexico. We can use that money for any water supply project. We don't have to do a Gila River diversion. But then there's some additional money that the state could receive if we developed water on the Gila River. So there's about $100 million that we are getting from the Arizona Water Settlements Act to develop this project. So what's on the table right now? This is kind of a mock-up just to kind of give you an idea of what we're talking about. So right now, the New Mexico Central Arizona Project entity, the New Mexico CAP entity, they're the local group. They are charged with design, planning, construction, operation of the Gila River diversion. Its sort of legal term is called the New Mexico Unit of the Central Arizona Project, because essentially that's what this is. It's all connected, one big giant part of the Central Arizona Project. How many people know what the Central Arizona Project is? A few people? Quickly, I'll just tell you, Central Arizona Project came about in 1968 with a piece of legislation that essentially created a network of canals to pipe water from the Colorado River to Phoenix and Tucson. So, so this Gila River diversion project is part of this big, it's essentially the final phase or build out of the Central Arizona Project. So back to the proposed action. So it consists of a diversion dam at the existing Gila gauge on the Gila River. You can look up the data on the USGS website and know what the flows are on the Gila River. The idea would be to tie in the diversion structure to that gauge location. And this is just outside of the wilderness area. It's a few miles down from the boundary of the wilderness. And essentially a diversion, at least how it's envisioned here, is a concrete dam across the river. It will impound or pond up water a bit. It will capture sediment. It will prevent fish from migrating upstream and maintaining that genetic diversity in our native fish, which is so important for the long-term survivability of the fish. And essentially what it does is it conveys water into these pipelines. And the CAP entity has outlined 3 phases. First phase would be to construct the diversion. Second phase would be a reservoir in Wind Canyon on the west side of the river, and a second reservoir in Spar Canyon on the east side of the river. And at some point, they're talking about perhaps piping this water over the Continental Divide to Demick community in the Mibris Basin, just south of Silver City. And, you know, some things to know about this project: you'd have to line these storage reservoirs. The soil where they'll be constructed is very porous. So you put water in, it basically just sinks back into the ground. So a lot of the cost is really wrapped up in lining the storage reservoirs. And as you can imagine, 15 to 30% of the water in the reservoirs can evaporate, and that's depending upon surface area. Building out the entire thing is going to cost $850 million. Remember, I told you the subsidy at maximum is about $100 million. $100 million. We've already been spending money, not sufficient to cover the cost of this project. So just like its predecessors, this 4th attempt to divert the Gila is doomed. It's got a lot of technical issues. Funding isn't sufficient. We don't know if irrigators and municipalities can pay for it. We have no idea how much this water is going to cost. The project proponents are not telling the public how much it's going to cost. So this thing has been moving along for over 10 years without anybody really knowing how much it's going to cost them. But the good news is that the project really isn't necessary from a water supply standpoint. We've got plentiful groundwater underneath Silver City and Deming, and just by sustainable groundwater management, we can get these groundwater supplies to meet our future water needs. And how can we do this? Well, we've already talked about municipal conservation, agricultural conservation, infrastructure improvements, trying to sustainably manage our groundwater supplies through adaptive management, effluent reuse, watershed restoration. All of these things are on the table and have been talked about. I know you all are probably scratching your head and saying, why is this project still going on? I mean, I've been scratching my head for all these years with, this information is just, you'd think it would doom it, but really, I think that the local New Mexico CAP entity, it has fallen victim to the Western water paradigm, right? Develop water at all cost, never say no to water, and it's really compounded by this huge financial incentive under the Arizona Water Settlements Act to build a large-scale diversion project. So remember, the only way that New Mexico can get this additional $34 or so million is if we build a project. So just doesn't really make sense. Again, sometimes our laws really provide a perverse incentive on rational natural resource management. So, as we've said, the project isn't needed, and it's really unbelievable in the face of this information that the local CAP entity is still pushing ahead. I mean, they're really, Gila River diversion is really sort of a 20th century solution to a 21st century problem. We are confronted with climate change. We need to be building resilient, or creating a resilient water future for our communities. We can't be dependent upon an over-allocated Colorado River. Everybody's heard that the Colorado River is over-allocated. This diversion project would be part of that whole entire system. So it really doesn't make sense, and we're very concerned that the studying of this project is just spending more and more and more of this really, these free resources that we could be spending on local community water projects. And of course, conservation, as we're saying, we've seen this all before. We've been fighting these projects for 4 decades. And meanwhile, New Mexico has lost 90% of its riparian areas. Just 10% left, and the Gila River is part of that 10%. And so it's really critical that we permanently protect the Gila River and hold on to our natural and cultural heritage. So what can we do? So as this proposal moves into the NEPA phase, the National Environmental Policy Act, we need to be sure that we're using all the legal tools available to us to defeat the diversion and try and steer people towards these more cost-effective community water projects that really can build a more resilient water future at a fraction of the cost. And I'm really hopeful that Mary's talk gave me some ideas on the potential maybe for the public trust here with the Gila River, because I think that NEPA certainly is not a sure bet to defeat the diversion project. I mean, it's going to be a long, tough battle, and of course, after last week's election, it's not going to be any easier. So we're very concerned. We're also working on proposing the Gila River for designation under the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. to permanently protect the river. So the act was passed in 1968 to really balance national water development, dams and diversions, with protection of very important, unique, rare, exemplary rivers for conservation purposes. And we believe that the GILA meets the eligibility requirements for wild and scenic designation, and that it really is imperative that we move ahead with this designation. After last week's election, we'll see. That might not happen for a while, but we think it's a pretty, it's pretty important. We need to, we're not going to be around forever, and it's really hard. Conservationists have to win every single battle to protect the Gila River. We have to win all of them, and all it's going to take is just one success on the other side before we lose the river. So just some other ideas, other things that we've been working on. I think as local water boosters really push forward with this project, and as I've said, I mean, it really is fraught with so many technical problems. We really need to be having conversations with one another. And this has happened on and off over the years. We really need to understand everybody's perspectives. We need to be really trying to create win-win solutions. What does that look like? I mean, Mary mentioned conservation easements. That's something that's been talked about. Diversion structures, crossvein structures that are built in such a way that they can parse the flow of the river and direct some water into irrigation ditches, but maintain an in-stream flow. We need to be thinking more creatively. Again, more 21st century technologies to solve some of these problems. And from an institutional perspective, our governmental institutions really have failed us. I mean, they're not set up to provide a place at the table for the river, right? The river doesn't have a voice in these proceedings. And so we really need to create and invest in institutions that can more equitably make these decisions and balance consumptive use with the needs of the river. So I really feel like the Gila is a crown jewel, and we really have an opportunity here to protect the Gila River while at the same time meeting our water needs in a cost-effective way. And I'm really hoping that our community in southwestern New Mexico can really get together and really serve as a model for how we can talk to one another and how we can come up with these solutions, because these problems are only going to be getting worse with climate change, population growth. These pressures are getting more and more difficult. And so, I'm hopeful that we can have that conversation and we can get it done. And with that, thank you very much. Thank you very much.